Hi, today we're going to talk about the labour market, the fourth topic in section 3. So let's begin. So start our activity today. Imagine you are a producer of cars. So Audi, BMW, Ford, Volkswagen, Toyota, you are a producer of cars. Okay. Will the following changes in the market increase or decrease your demand for labour, for workers? Okay. So pause the video, have a quick think. Will these three scenarios increase the demand for car workers or decrease the demand for car workers? Okay, so if there's an increase in the demand for cars, then we can summarize that we can conclude that there will be an increase in the demand for car workers, because car workers are what's known as derived demand. We'll come back to that definition in a minute. So basically the demand for car workers comes from the demand for cars. So if there's an increase in demand for cars, then businesses will demand more car workers, so the demand for labor will increase. What if there's a decrease in the cost of machinery? Well, machinery and labor could be seen as substitute goods. So using our basic supply and demand analysis, if the price of a substitute decreases, then the demand of the substitute will also decrease. So therefore, we would see a decrease in the demand for workers in that case. An increase in recruitment costs are going to increase the cost of recruiting. So therefore, businesses would demand less. That's the law of demand. The more expensive something is, the less people demand of it. Okay, so the demand for workers, or car workers in this case, interacts and follows the exact same rules as the demand for any commodity or good or service. Okay, so the second part of the starter then, we've got three more scenarios, but this time we're thinking about the supply of labour. Okay, so what if we've got an increase in net immigration? What if we've got an increase in the school leaving age? And what if we have better opportunities for women in work? What effect would these three changes have on the supply of labour? So if there's an increase in net immigration, that means that more people are coming into the country, so therefore the supply of labour has increased. Okay, so we have more workers available to work in the car plant or any other job. An increase in the school leaving age, that's going to decrease the supply of labour because people are in school rather than in the labour force. That's going to decrease the supply of labour. And better opportunities for women in work, therefore there would be an increase in the supply of labour because there's more people that could join the labour force. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at is the labour market, and the labour market is just like any other market. Okay, we can say a labour market is a place where businesses and employees interact with each other, just like businesses interact with consumers in a standard supply and demand diagram. A labour market is just a slightly altered supply and demand diagram. So the only change is you'll notice we have wage rate rather than price, because the price of labour is its wage. Okay, so we still have upward sloping supply, downward sloping demand, but instead of price on the y-axis, we have wage on the y-axis. Okay, x-axis on my example, because I've stolen this off Google, it says quantity of clothing workers. That's just quantity of workers. Okay, so the actual, is that going to work? So the clothing bit is just because that's the image that I've stolen. It's just the quantity of workers. Okay, and we still have an equilibrium wage and an equilibrium number of workers. Okay, so in an economy, who supplies the labour? Well, people can supply the labour, don't they? So consumers, society, the population supply labour, and businesses demand the labour. Okay, why do businesses demand labour? Well, that's because of derived demand. So derived demand is the demand for commodity or good or service that has come from somewhere else. So the demand for that good comes from the demand for another good. So I think a really good example is lithium batteries. Nobody demands lithium batteries because they like to stick them on their walls or chew on them or put them in their shoes. It doesn't make sense. But the demand for lithium batteries comes from the demand for electronic devices such as smartphones, GoPros, laptops, iPads, whatever it might be. So we can say the demand for lithium batteries is derived demand. The demand for lithium batteries is directly related to the demand for something else. And it's the same with workers. Workers are also an example of derived demand. Workers are demanded for the goods and services that they help produce, not the value of the workers themselves. Okay, so the labor demand is derived demand, which means the demand for it is derived from something else. So what I want us to do now, do the following factors affect the supply or the demand for labor? I don't want to go through these in the video. That's what I did on the previous one. I will put up an answer sheet shortly. So does this factor, is that going to affect supply or demand of labor? Okay. So show the effect. So we've got some diagrams now. So I want to show this diagrammatically. So show the effect of an increase for houses on the market for builders. So show the effect of an increase in the demand for houses. So find a diagram on Google Images that represents an increase in demand, and then how would that affect the market for builders? So if you just go increase in demand workers, okay, we can find something that looks like, well, we've got an increase in demand, but we've also got an increase in supply, so that's not going to do it. You might have to draw your own. Yeah, you might have to draw your own, but the key thing is that we've got wage on the y-axis. Okay, so going back to the worksheet. So we've got another example here. So the price of machinery used to harvest wheat falls. What effect is that going to happen? What effect is that going to have on the market for farm workers? And the school leaving age is increased from 16 to 18. What effect will that happen? And then you need to say what's going to happen to the supply, the demand, and the wage rate. And also another one about more legislation following Brexit. I'll show you some answers in a minute. So work through this in your own time, pause the video, and then you can open the answer sheet shortly. Okay, so we've got another little task here. So watch the following clip on YouTube discussing why footballers are paid so much. So, and then you've got a thinking task, and so watch the video, and then we've got a discussion task. Why do professional footballers earn a relatively high wage? Okay, so have a think about that. Think of supply, demand. You can also think about the elasticity of supply. How elastic is the supply of footballers? Then a little bit of article about why does Wall Street pay so much? So why does stock market workers get paid so much? And again, a couple of thinking questions and discussion questions, and then some data. Okay, so have a look through these different charts. You might need to zoom in a little bit to have a look at the data and the axes and what it's showing here. And then it says, what can you infer from these graphs about pay differences, disparities in the labour market? And then a final box, discussion, are public or private sector workers employed more? And you can do a bit of your own research to find out what the answer is to that. It's not always a cut and dry answer to that, but there is a general rule for public and private sector workers. Okay, so that is the labour market, the basics of the labour market. The key thing is that the labour market is where businesses and workers interact, and they interact in the exact same way as any other commodity. Okay? So any questions, let me know. And in our Google Meet, if you can think of any questions, you can ask any questions face-to-face when we all meet later this week. Okay? Thank you.